Last time we took a trip in the twin-turbo Gallardo, things didn't end so well. Being towed off the road in Spain, being almost compounded by the police, and sleeping in a Fiat Panda. But this time, we hope things to be a little different.
Imagine finally getting the Lamborghini you dreamed about as a kid, only to discover that the car sitting in your garage might be so badly damaged that it could be worth almost nothing. Now imagine paying $30,000 for that car. Sounds crazy, right? Most people would look at a wrecked Lamborghini and run the other way. But for someone who has spent years working on damaged cars, building machines, and turning vehicles that seem impossible to save into something that can drive again, a wrecked supercar can look very different. It can look like an opportunity. That is exactly what happened when a heavily damaged Lamborghini ended up in the hands of car enthusiasts after passing through several different owners, including Mat Armstrong. What makes the story even more interesting is that Mat had paid around $93,000 for the car, yet eventually offered it to his friend for only $30,000. At first, that sounds like an unbelievable bargain, but there was a reason the price had dropped so much. This was not a normal used Lamborghini, sitting in perfect condition. This was a seriously damaged car that had already been through a wild history, including its appearance as a famous Mr. Beast duct tape Lamborghini. The car had been crashed, damaged, taken apart, passed between different people, and left with enough problems to make even experienced builders question whether rebuilding it made financial sense. The new owner knew that before he bought it. He also knew something else. The Lamborghini had come with around $35,000 worth of parts. That changed the entire calculation. Even if the car could not be repaired, there was a chance that the parts alone could help recover some of the money spent on the purchase. But there was a much bigger reason for taking the risk. For years, Lamborghini had represented the ultimate dream for the new owner. Like many car lovers who grew up around posters, model cars, and toy versions of exotic machines, he believed that owning a Lamborghini meant you had finally made it. It was not simply another sports car. It was a dream car. Now, after years of working on cars, that dream was finally sitting in front of him. The problem was that this particular Lamborghini was far from the perfect supercar most people imagine when they hear the name. It was damaged, incomplete, and full of questions. The biggest question was simple. Could it actually be saved? That question became the heart of the entire project. The first step was not rebuilding the Lamborghini or ordering expensive parts. It was figuring out exactly what had happened to the car. Before any serious repair could begin, the new owner needed to understand why previous owners had stopped working on it. The car had already passed through several people. It had been bought by someone who wanted to perform a body swap. Then later went to Ed Gasket, who planned to rebuild it. Eventually, the amount of work became more than Ed wanted to take on, and the Lamborghini was sold to Mat Armstrong. Mat also worked on it, but the project eventually reached a point where selling it made more sense. That history made the $30,000 offer both exciting and frightening. The car was cheap for a reason. The challenge was finding out whether that reason was manageable or disastrous. The first major discovery came when the new owner started going for the parts that came with the Lamborghini. At first, the amount of equipment and replacement parts seemed almost too good to be true. Instead of simply finding a wrecked shell with nothing useful around it, he realized that the car came with a large collection of expensive components. Every box and every piece removed from the car represented another possibility. Some of the parts were expected, but others were complete surprises. One of the funniest discoveries was a piece of expensive Lamborghini glass that had not even been on the original list of parts. The owner was genuinely excited because he knew how expensive parts for an exotic car could be. A piece that might cost around $2,000 could make a huge difference to someone trying to rebuild a Lamborghini on a limited budget. This is one of the details that makes the story so interesting. The person who bought the car was not approaching the project with an unlimited bank account. He repeatedly explained that he could not simply spend thousands of dollars every time something was missing. That meant every useful part mattered. Every free component could save real money. Every damaged part that could be repaired instead of replaced could keep the project alive. In a normal Lamborghini rebuild, money might be a problem, but in this case, the budget was part of the story. The entire reason the $30,000 purchase was possible was because the car had been bought cheaply enough to give a new owner a chance. if he had paid $90,000 or $100,000 for the same wreck, the project could have become financially impossible almost immediately. Instead, he had room to take risks. He could inspect the car, sell parts if necessary, search for used components, and find creative solutions. But there was still a huge unknown sitting underneath everything. The structural damage. Cosmetic damage can make a Lamborghini look terrible while still being relatively simple to repair. Structural damage is different. If the main frame or important mounting areas have moved, twisted, or cracked, the cost and difficulty can rise quickly. That is why the next stage of the project was so important. The owner needed to stop thinking about how the Lamborghini looked and start understanding how the crash had changed its structure. The rear damage was already known because the car had been involved in the famous duct tape video, where it had even been shot at by a tank, cracking the rear window. But the front and side areas were less clear. The new owner wanted to know how much of the car had actually moved during the accident. He started removing panels, checking gaps, looking at bends in the metal, and studying marks left behind by the impact. What looked like a simple damage panel from the outside could actually be evidence of a much larger movement underneath. The A-pillar, roof area, door section, and firewall all needed careful inspection. This was not simply about making the Lamborghini look straight again. The goal was to understand whether the structure could be returned to the correct position. That is where the project became a real investigation. The new owner was not just repairing what he could see. He was trying to reconstruct the story of the crash by reading the damage left behind on the CA as the inspection continued. The Lamborghini started revealing just how serious its problems were. One of the first major areas of concern was the A-pillar and roof structure. The door had been forced backward during the impact, and that movement had affected the surrounding metal. The owner could see signs that the pillar had moved, twisted, and pushed into other parts of the structure. These small changes matter because a vehicle structure is designed to work as a connected system. When one section moves, another section can be pushed, pulled, or twisted as a result. That meant the damage could not be judged by looking at one bent piece in isolation. The owner had to follow the damage from one area into another. He noticed bends, buckles, gaps, and changes in the metal that suggested the structure had been pushed backward. The roof also showed signs of movement. The important thing was that not every discovery was terrible news. Some sections looked difficult, but still reparable. That created an interesting emotional rhythm in the video. One moment, the owner would discover something that looked frightening, and the next he would explain that it was still possible to fix. He even joked about how he always seemed to say that a problem was not that bad, only to discover that it usually was. That humor helped keep the inspection from becoming too serious or technical. At the same time, the audience could see that the owner understood the difference between a difficult repair and an impossible repair. A section could be heavily damaged and still be worth saving. That distinction became very important because the entire project depended on finding the line between those two situations. One particularly difficult area was the damaged pillar section. The owner explained that it could not simply be cut in a small area and patched with another piece. The entire section would need to be removed and replaced. He rated the job extremely high on the difficulty scale, around 8 or 9 out of 10, but still believed it was possible. That is a perfect example of why this rebuild was more interesting than a normal repair video. The audience was constantly being asked to judge the same question alongside the builder. Is this still a Lamborghini that can be saved, or has the damage gone too far? Every new discovery could change the answer. The owner also found damage around the cowl and firewall area. Some of this looked complicated, but he explained that certain pieces were attached using glue, rivets, and seemed sealer rather than being one giant welded section. That meant some damaged components could potentially be drilled out and replaced. Again, the project seemed possible, but the front of the Lamborghini was still a major unknown. The car appeared twisted, with one side sitting higher than the other. Instead of relying only on his eyes, the owner began taking measurements to understand exactly how far the structure had moved. This was important because visual inspection can tell you that something is wrong, but measurements can tell you how wrong it is. By comparing different points on the car, he found differences of several fractions of an inch. Those numbers might sound small, but on a structural part of a vehicle, small differences can matter. The inspection had now moved beyond simply looking at damage. It had become a process of measuring the car and determining where the original structure had been displaced. Eventually, the inspection reached a point where the owner knew he had to look deeper. The outside of the Lamborghini had already revealed a long list of problems, but the real answer could be hiding underneath the visible panels. That meant taking more parts off the car and inspecting the areas that were still covered. This is where the project became even more serious. The owner explained that when a damaged car is taken apart, you often find strange things left behind by previous owners or by the accident itself. In this Lamborghini, there were dozens of memory cards hidden inside the car. At first, everyone wondered if they were connected to the famous Mr. Beast video. Later, they discovered that the cards came from a company that had previously owned the Lamborghini and used it for dream car experiences. People could ride in the car, have a short video recorded, and receive the footage on memory cards. Somehow, many of those cards had fallen into the interior and remained underneath the carpet. Naturally, the team checked them, hoping there might be something interesting on them, but the cards contained nothing useful. Then there was the glass. Because the Lamborghini had suffered such a violent impact, broken glass had spread throughout the vehicle. It was not simply sitting in obvious places. Pieces had made their way into areas that could cause problems later. The owner explained that the blower box would need to be cleaned to make sure glass would not eventually come out through the air conditioning system. This might sound like a small detail compared with structural damage, but it shows how complicated a serious crash can become. Damage does not always stay in one place. Broken glass, dirt, debris, damaged wiring, and hidden cracks can turn into future problems if they are ignored. The team also found a strange bracket that had been created to help control the Lamborghini during the duct tape stunt. That discovery connected the damaged car, sitting in the workshop, to its strange history. But the biggest discovery was still waiting underneath. Once the team exposed more of the front structure, they found evidence of serious damage around the frame rails. A large crack was visible close to the suspension pickup area. That was a major problem because the frame rail is not just a cosmetic piece. It is part of the structure that helps support important components. The owner believed that the crack could explain why the rails were sitting at different heights. Suddenly, the project had become much more expensive in theory. The parts that had already been collected were useful, but they were not enough. The team needed an entire section of the rail, and one of the pieces they already had could no longer be used in the way they had hoped. Previous work on the Lamborghini had also created another problem, because part of the structure had already been cut near a crumple zone. That meant the repair could not simply be completed by attaching another small piece. A larger structural section was needed. This was the kind of discovery that could destroy the budget of a project like this. The owner admitted that he did not have thousands of dollars available to spend freely on Lamborghini parts. He had bought the car for $30,000 partly, because that was what he could afford. Now he was looking at expensive structural components, plus a bumper, fenders, wiring work, and other parts that had not even been fully calculated yet. The dream Lamborghini was starting to look less like a bargain and more like a financial trap. The financial pressure became even clearer when the owner began searching for replacement parts online. One structural piece he found was listed for around $7,600. For someone with a huge budget, that might be an annoying expense. For this project, it was a serious problem. $7,600 could completely change the direction of the build. Remember, the Lamborghini had already cost $30,000. The owner still needed other body panels, a bumper, fenders, wiring work, and potentially many smaller pieces. If he simply bought every part at retail prices, the cost could quickly move far beyond what made sense. That is where the true challenge of the $30,000 Lamborghini became clear. Buying the car cheaply did not guarantee that rebuilding it would be cheap. In fact, damaged exotic cars can be dangerous financially because even one missing structural component can cost several $1,000s. The owner needed another solution. He searched through listings and discovered a possible alternative: a used front section from another Lamborghini. One listing showed a frame from a 2010 Gallardo for around $4,000. That was still a lot of money, but it was significantly less than the $7,600 component he had first found. Even then, spending another $4,000 was not ideal. The goal was to find a way to repair the Lamborghini, without destroying the budget. This is where the story took an unexpected turn. Instead of simply ordering an expensive part, the owner started making phone calls. He contacted someone who also needed to work on a Gallardo and had recently picked up a large number of parts. The person did not need everything he had. That meant some of those parts might be available. The owner asked if he could buy them, but the answer was even better than expected. The person told him he could have the parts for free, as long as he came and picked them up. Suddenly, the $30,000 Lamborghini project had a new mission. The problem was no longer simply how to repair the car. Now, the problem was how to get thousands of miles away to collect the parts. The solution sounded simple on paper. Fly out, rent a truck, load the parts, and drive them back. In reality, it meant a huge road trip across the country. The owner estimated that the journey would cover roughly 2,000 miles and could take around 3 days. It was an unusual situation. Most people would never imagine flying across the country to collect pieces of a wrecked Lamborghini so they could save money on a rebuild. But that was exactly what the project required. It also added a new layer of adventure to the story. The Lamborghini was no longer sitting quietly in a workshop, waiting for repairs. The rebuild had expanded beyond the garage. The owner and his cameraman were now getting on a plane and heading west in search of the parts that might decide whether the Lamborghini could survive. The audience had another reason to keep watching, because the success of the rebuild now depended on what they would find at the other end of the journey. If the parts were usable, they could save thousands of dollars. If they were not, the project would still face the same expensive problems. It was another perfect example of the story's central theme. Every solution came with another challenge. When they arrived in Utah, the rebuild took another surprising turn. The team needed tools to cut apart the donor Lamborghini. That solution eventually led them across the country to collect free parts from another Lamborghini. This is the real lesson of the entire story. Rebuilding an exotic car is not always about having the most money. Sometimes it's about knowing where to look, who to call, what could be repaired, what could be reused, and when to take a risk. The buyer did not have an unlimited budget, so he had to be creative. That creativity became one of the most entertaining parts of the project. Every time the budget seemed ready to explode, he searched for another way forward. That kept the story alive. The audience was not only asking whether the Lamborghini could be repaired, they were also asking whether the owner could afford to finish it. Those are two different questions, and both are important. In the end, the story of the $30,000 Lamborghini is really a story about taking a huge risk for something you truly want. The car had already lived several lives before it reached its new owner. It had been involved in a famous stunt, crashed, sold, partially rebuilt, and passed from one person to another. By the time Mat Armstrong bought it, there was already a long list of problems. When he later offered it for $30,000, the new owner had to decide whether he was looking at a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity or a financial disaster. He chose the opportunity. What followed was not a simple repair job. It was an investigation into the car's history, structure, damage, and future. The team discovered expensive parts, hidden memory cards, broken glass, damaged structural sections, cracks, twisted rails, and evidence of how the original impact had moved the car. They found problems that were worse than expected, but they also found evidence that the Lamborghini was not beyond saving. Then, when the cost of replacement parts threatened to destroy the budget, they found another path. A long trip to Utah led them to a donor Lamborghini and a generous offer of free parts. They cut apart the donor car, loaded the pieces into a truck, and drove them back across the country. It was a crazy solution, but it was exactly the kind of solution this project needed. The most important thing about the story is that the Lamborghini was never treated as just another damaged car. For the owner, it was a dream car he had imagined since childhood. That emotional connection explains why he was willing to spend $30,000 on something that many people would consider a wreck. It also explains why every new problem mattered so much. If the car was impossible to save, the dream could become a very expensive mistake. But if the rebuild succeeded, the reward would be much bigger than simply owning a Lamborghini. It would mean taking something that looked broken and bringing it back to life. The journey also shows why automotive rebuild videos can be so addictive. The audience gets the excitement of exotic cars, the mystery of hidden damage, the fear of rising costs, the satisfaction of finding rare parts, the humor of unexpected problems, an emotional reward of seeing a damaged machine slowly become whole again. The $30,000 price is what gets people interested, but the story of the rebuild is what keeps them watching. At the start, the question is whether buying Mat Armstrong's Lamborghini for $30,000 was a smart decision. As the inspection continues, the question becomes whether the car can physically be saved. Then the question becomes whether the owner can afford to save it. Finally, the story becomes about how far someone is willing to go to protect a dream. That is why this Lamborghini is more than a wrecked supercar. It represents a gamble, a challenge, and a childhood dream sitting inside one damaged machine. The real value of the car cannot be measured only by its price tag. It is measured by what the owner is willing to do to bring it back.